The idea was that a lot of entrepreneurs and ambitious people will tend to set goals, and then we'll always be measuring ourselves against what we think we could have achieved. And we rarely stop to give ourselves credit, the gain for what we have achieved. No matter what you're doing, do you ever stop and look at what your aspirations were 5 or 10 years ago?
Right.
And give yourself some credit for what you've achieved.
Man, this is a good one. I'm bringing on Andy Storch, my new best friend. This guy, author, facilitator, keynote speaker, recently moved to Barcelona. Why? Because he could. Comes on here to talk to us today about how to own your career and own your life. This is not just applicable to entrepreneurs, but anybody who works in a, let's say, corporate job somewhere. And he's author, multiple podcasts, sharp guy, shares a lot of good information. Listen in. Do more by doing less. With me, Charles Alexander, for small business owners, startups, and busy folks. Listen, I normally don't ask a whole lot about people's backstories, not because I'm not interested, but sometimes it turns into the entire show. But in your particular case, man, give me the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah, man, I've had the pleasure, I've been lucky to be able to travel a lot all over the world for the last 15 years. A lot of it for work, some for fun. And I always thought it'd be really cool to live outside the US and just experience living in a different culture. And my wife agreed. We've talked about trying to live in Europe for over 10 years. And the last 2 years, we've had some friends that made moves to Portugal and Spain, and power of social media. We're kind of like, well, if they can do it, maybe we can do it too. Started asking a lot of questions, doing research. And a few months ago, last year, we decided to just give it a shot, and we made the move.
So tell me how you put yourself in a position, and this is going to get us into the point where we are about owning your career and owning your life, because we're the do more, do better. Do more, but do better. Lord, I have to edit that. Do more by doing less podcast.
That's right.
How did you put yourself in a position where you're like, yep, we're going to move to Barcelona?
Well, there's a couple things there. I mean, one, when I talk to people about owning your career and owning your life, the first thing, the foundation of it is taking full responsibility for everything going on in your career and your life. Like the things you want to achieve, like you got to take responsibility instead of waiting for somebody to bring that to you. The second thing is really getting to know yourself and what kind of career and life you want to have and what your strengths are and values and all that sort of stuff. As we made this move, I've started to tap into another part of that, which is having a book and being a speaker, doing all the things that I do. I pushes me, or maybe it causes me to push myself more to say, I've got to live in alignment with the things that I tell other people.
Right.
Follow your dreams, go out, take ownership of what you want. If this is something that I really want to do, why not give it a shot and go do it? And so we finally started doing the research and the work and said, there's never going to be a better time, to your point about the podcast. Like, we could wait for it to be the right time, but there's probably never going to be a better time. Our kids will
be 80.
Yeah. I could be 80, right? In fact, I read a book that helped me put me over the edge called Die with Zero. I don't know if you've read that book.
I've heard of the book.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's very counterculture. And it's kind of the idea that you need to go spend your money and experience life as much as you can while you can. And so that definitely helped encourage me. And then I just thought one thing I also do sometimes is kind of consult my older self. And speaking of being 80, if I were to have a conversation with my 80-year-old self and ask, hey, looking back on your life, what are the things that you regret? What are the things that you wish you would have done? What are the things you're proud of? And I think that I would want me to take a chance and do this thing because it's something that I was really thinking about, even though I knew there were risks involved, running a business remotely, that sort of stuff. But I am just so glad that we did. Life has been great here so far, plenty of challenges, but it's been an amazing experience.
I like to think of your future self. We call him Papa Storch.
There you go.
He's got a little goatee. He's actually added a couple pounds, but he's still in pretty good shape. We like him.
He's doing all right. Well, that comes down to, which is probably I'm sure a theme on your show, really connecting with your priorities. What are the things that you really care about? What do you want to get done? All right. What's important to you when it comes to goals and whatnot, but what do you care about in your life? And how many people say that family or travel or whatever is important to them, but then, there's the old thing, look at their calendar and see what they're really putting their time into. I try to check in with that on a regular basis. Okay, what's important to me? What do I want my life to look like? And can I make that happen instead of just being jealous of other people that are doing it?
No, it's a great way you laid all of that out, especially when you're talking about a little bit of a death by comparison. And I do that all of the time. I'm not even a heavy social media user, but just taking a look around. If you're hanging out with other people that are coaches or consultants or trying to talk to you about mindset, and you take a look at what they have versus what you have. Obviously, there's a lot of reasons why you wouldn't necessarily want to do that. But even in those cases, when you do, if you see the guy in the gym that looks like he's benching 350, you're like, man, am I willing to do that? And then in a lot of cases, nah, I'm not willing to go through all of that. But in other cases, like, I could do that. When we have that imposter syndrome or insert buzzword here, we think, that's not for me. But in a lot of cases, it is, which kind of brings me to your topic. How did you get, I mean, you've got several things going on. The point of the one that we want to chat about is the owning your career, own your life.
Yeah.
How did you tell us what that is and how does somebody do that?
Yeah. And I like what you said. I mean, and comparison, by the way, is completely natural. Like, I actually wrote a chapter in my book about it, and I still get sucked into it all the time. I'm like, oh, this person has this. Why is their life so much better than mine? Like, well, is it really? Because the guy with could bench 350 and has a 6-pack abs, he might be strong as hell, and that's enviable, but he might be miserable at home, or he doesn't make very much money. Like, you don't know what's going on.
But he hasn't had a piece of cake in 3 years.
Right. Exactly. His life is not that enjoyable. Come on. There's a balance to things. But to get into how I got into what I'm doing today, I worked in corporate consulting for many years, going back to like the opportunity to travel a lot. And in 2016, I had this sort of like crucible moment in my life, January 2016, where I had a good career and a family, but I felt like something was really missing for me, and I didn't know what it was. And I was listening to a podcast and heard a guy named Hal Elrod, who wrote a book called The Miracle Morning. And I don't know if you've heard of him or read his book, but it would really just kind of struck a point with me where I was like, man, this is something that I need to dig into. And I got his book, and I'd never done anything personal development related before. I'd never read any books or anything like that. And I got his book.
I put a pause on this. 8 years ago, you were just trucking through life, working at the corporate gig, happy, and you're not reading, you're not journaling, you're not meditating,
No, none of that stuff. I was reading a couple books a year, maybe a business book. I'd read the newspaper.
Sure.
And like I said, I had a good job. I had an MBA, I had a grad degree, an MBA, and a good job and stuff like that, and a wife and a daughter. But no, I wasn't in any of this personal development stuff until 8 years ago. And I read this book, and it was like the whole world opened up to me. I started getting up. The whole idea is like, get up earlier than you need to do things like meditation, affirmations, reading, journaling, exercise, stuff like that. I was always big into fitness, but I hadn't done any of these other things. I started meditating every day. I started reading lots of books, listening to lots of podcasts, journaling all the time, and doing a lot of self-reflection, introspection. And what I learned through that time is I was really drawn to this idea of entrepreneurship. There had been no entrepreneurs in my family. My parents were teachers, and I didn't even know what that was growing up. But for some reason, I was like, I need to go be an entrepreneur. And so I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to do that, joining mastermind groups, going to conferences, like really fast tracking, trying to learn as much as I could. And I got a great opportunity from a friend to make a transition to become more of an independent consultant with a small company, sort of like a commission only type job, but really getting kind of run things like I want. And that led to me doing lots of things, starting a couple of podcasts. I started a conference with a friend of mine that came from the podcast, and started really like working on building a personal brand, posting things on LinkedIn and other social media platforms. And one day I had this idea that as I'm doing all this work to try to build a career and a life that I love, that I now have a lot of the tools that maybe could help other people do the same. And at the same time, I'm hearing, and you're in this world, you may hear this too, these people on these podcasts that are like, well, if you don't like your job, you need to quit the 9 to 5 and start your own business.
Burn the boats.
Yeah, burn the boats and like go start. And like, okay, yeah, sure. Like, it resonates with me. But I'd be talking with my corporate clients and other people in the corporate world. And they're like, I would never want to run my own business, right? Like, I have no interest in being, I could never do what you do. Yeah. And so what I realized is like, not everybody's cut out to be an entrepreneur. Not everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. So people love working for a big company and having all the connections and stuff like that. But what I think everybody does want is to feel happy and fulfilled in their career and their life. That's right. And so I felt like I had, through all my own research and trying things, the tools and the pieces that could help people do that. And that's where I got the idea for the book. Kind of came to me as really like a lightning bolt while I was at a conference having a conversation with a friend in 2019. And so 2020, I wrote the book and I published it. Pandemic gave me a little extra time to do that. No kidding. And I've been building a business around it ever since. And I'm very lucky now that I I set that vision and I worked hard to achieve it, but I feel very fortunate now that I get to speak in a lot of organizations to teach people how to own their careers.
Man, that is, golly, for anybody listening too, I know 8 years may sound like a long time to a lot of people. You're talking about 16 to where you are now, but it sounds like in 4 years, you went from, and I'm not taking anything away from you because I've been that guy and a lot of people listening still are like, I don't really, I read, but like one or two books here and there. I'm not getting up early. I'm not the journaling, meditating. I go to the gym and I'm happy at work. But to go from that and in 4 short years to being full blown and teaching other people to do it, golly, that's fast tracking. I think you hit the nail on the head, but that's also part of setting a vision, to being decisive and then going and doing it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. The funny thing is, when you do set big goals, they almost always take longer than you want them to. So there were like many frustrating moments where I'm like, why isn't this happening faster? Right.
Why am I doing this?
Yeah. But you wake up one day and you have the job that you want, or the career that you want, or you're making the money that you sought after, or you have the life that you want. And oftentimes we don't even give ourselves credit for that because we're always just setting the next goal or measuring ourselves up against what we think would have been possible, or the people that we look at, other people that are quote unquote more successful than us. So I think it's really important. I learned this actually from reading a book last year called The Gap and the Gain. I forget the authors, but if you've read that one.
Gap and the Gain, the same guy that wrote 10X is easier than 2X.
Yeah, I think so. I haven't read that one yet, but the idea was that a lot of entrepreneurs and ambitious people will tend to set goals, and then we'll always be measuring ourselves against what we think we could have achieved even more, or against greater things. And we rarely stop to give ourselves credit, the gain, for what we have achieved, no matter what you're doing, whether you're trying to be a speaker or an entrepreneur, or you're just trying to move up and provide for your family. Do you ever stop and look at what your aspirations were 5 or 10 years ago, and give yourself some credit for what you've achieved, even if it's just holding down a job and paying a mortgage and providing for your kids? Like, that's freaking great, because a lot of people don't do that.
Now that's a great point. Dan Sullivan is his name, and he's I think I was playing about Papa Storch a little while ago. This guy I think is nearly 80 years old and is cranking out like 4 books a year because that's what he wanted to do. But that's a major point that he makes in a few of his books, and it's excellent information. Comparing yourself to where you came from, and not, I need to compare Charles to where Charles was in 2020, not to where Andy was, or I'll be frustrated that the Alexanders aren't in Dublin, which I would not pick Dublin, but I'm sure it's a fantastic place. In looking at this, what are some of these steps in anybody listening, watching, that wants to own their career so they can own their life? What do they need? What do they need to start doing?
Yeah, so I lay it out in the book, of course, but the quick idea is that you start with the foundation, which is taking ownership of your career. The idea of owning your career is that you do take ownership and full responsibility for everything going on in your career and your life. Whether you are in a job or you have a business, you treat it like it is your business, and you don't wait for other people to tell you what to do, where to go. Because I observed so many people in my consulting years, so many people drifting through their careers, right? They're sort of showing up, I'll work hard and I'll see what happens. I'll see what I get. And that does work out for some people. They move up the corporate ladder, but many others are just waiting. I just had a conversation today with a friend, a guy who joined my community, who's been working for a company for 22 years. And he scrapped his way to get to a senior manager or director position. And then they decided to do some layoffs, and he didn't get laid off, but they basically told him, if you want to stay here, you got to take a demotion. And he realized, he's read my book, and he said, this is my new manifesto. I'm going to own my career. It starts with saying, I'm going to take ownership of this. I'm not going to wait for other people to tell me what to do or where to go. Then you need to go do some, build your self-awareness, which starts with self-reflection. Some of the things I talked about with the Miracle Morning, but really taking time to really reflect on your life, who you are and where you want to go. Some questions you can be asking yourself are, how did I get to where I am today? What do I like about it? What do I not like about it? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses or developmental opportunities? What are my values, the things I really care about? What are my energizers, the things that really light me up or get me excited? Sit down with a cup of coffee or tea and a notebook or a pen in a quiet space and just write some of these things out, and then use that to inform the vision that you set. Your vision, or kind of step one in the process after you get through that, is to set a vision for where you want to go in your career and your life. You can start to dream of all the things that you would love to be doing. For instance, I dreamed of, on the life side, moving my family to Europe. And finally decided to make it happen. But what are those things that you'd love to be doing? And then you can start to maybe get a little more realistic, get some feedback, but figure out that vision of what do you really want to achieve? And you may not know exactly, but what are you curious about? What do you want to learn more about? What might you want to try? Because we have a chance to really try a lot of different things. And I find that the more clarity we have on where we're going, the easier it is to respond to challenges and opportunities when they come up, right? And to put a plan together and actually be working towards something, which I find is a lot more fulfilling. So the next step would be to put a plan together and to start setting some specific goals and saying, okay, my vision is to become a keynote speaker, or my vision is to become a director, or to transition my career from finance to HR, or to get into sales, or to start a podcast, whatever it is.
Sure.
And then you start to put a plan in place. Okay, how am I going to get there? Who do I know that's done this? Who do I admire? Maybe you can ask them for some advice, but put that plan together and start to put some specific goals together and some milestones that you can hit, and start focusing on hitting those milestones so that you can achieve this bigger goal. It may take some years, like it did for me, but just making incremental progress over time is going to be really fulfilling versus just sitting there waiting for someone else to bring something to you.
Going back to step one, taking ownership, which I love the idea of, and it's something I drifted my first several years through a couple of jobs where I'm just
Me too.
showing up, doing what they're telling me, and things go well. It'll be all right. And to be blunt, I have several things I have going on now. I have a full-time job. I have a full-time business. I have coaching programs I have on my own. I have a book. I have a podcast. Sounds like I'm really doing some self-promotion here. Sorry, Andy. And
Your
talking
show,
about all that, but it was a few years back when I decided I'm taking ownership here, and we're going to run it like it's my business. And that's when things took off with the Small Business Development Center. And looking at somebody that's sitting in a cube somewhere, or even let's say a C-suite individual, what do you tell them when because that's a foreign concept to so many people. And I'm saying this, not just a busy professional. We have a ton of entrepreneurs that listen that don't take ownership because everything is the government's fault, the economy, the competition, the poor employees.
I know.
What are some of those first things they need to do when looking at taking ownership? How do they get into that mindset?
Yeah. The first thing is the commitment to, I'm going to own as much as I can of my career and my life. And I recognize that you can't do everything on your own, right? We need other people. There's a lot of factors that are outside of our control. So the first kind of tenet of the ownership mindset is that you focus most of your energy on what's in your control, and you recognize the things that are outside of your control. There's a lot of things outside of our control, right? Like the economy, the weather, politics, leadership in your company, your boss, even your spouse, even your kids and your pets are really not in your control, right? You can influence them, but they're still their own beings. Like my dog lets me know sometimes, like, I don't want to walk that way, right? I'm like, okay, you don't, but we're going to anyway. I have this leash. I have power over you, a sort of amount, right? But the point is, I don't control everything. But what I do control is how I respond to the events that are happening, how I show up, how I treat other people, how I treat myself, the vision and the goals that I set, how I spend my time, which a lot of people don't realize they have more control over how they spend their time than they think.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
Yes,
I mean, I know that's big for you and the work that you do.
My whole basis of being from this point on out, trying to teach people that if you've controlled your fitness, if you've controlled your finances, your time's the biggest issue here. And the older we get, the faster it goes. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I bet you love when people say, well, I'd love to get in better shape, but I don't have time, right? Or I'd love to do this, but I just don't have time. Like, really? Do you? Don't you? Now, everybody's situation is different, right? Everybody's situation is different. But it's still like we all have the same amount of time. Taking ownership of that and saying, okay, this is my situation. Here are the things out of my control, but here are the things that I can control. Let me focus more on those. And then I'm going to take more of an ownership mindset. So ownership mindset versus victim mindset is things are happening to me. I'm waiting for things to happen. Bad things are other people's fault, complaining all the time, like you said. The ownership mindset is I'm going to take ownership and responsibility for everything. And the subtle shift in language that I made years ago that was hugely helpful was moving from things are happening to me to the belief that things happen for me. And I truly believe everything in life happens for me. And when you believe that, you can start turning challenges into opportunities. And I've been through my fair share of challenges, from COVID shutting down my entire business in 2020 to finding out that I had cancer at the same time that I was publishing this book later in 2020, And yeah, and had surgery 2 days after I published the book, and many other challenges along the way. And I think it's really important to take ownership of these and say, okay, this is the hand that I've been dealt. It's not what I would have chosen, but I'm going to deal with it. I'm going to make the best of this situation. And I believe that this stuff is happening for me so that I can do X, whatever it may be, and then go take the action that you need to take, but not complaining or waiting for other people to bring something to you. And complaining can kind of feel good in the moment, but it never really gets you anywhere. One of my challenges I lay down in the book for people, and it started with, I think, someone laying this challenge down to me many years ago, is just to stop complaining and to try to take responsibility of every situation. If you get in the car to drive to a meeting or work and you run into a traffic jam you didn't expect and you end up being late, you can complain about that, or you could take responsibility and be like, well, if this meeting was really that important, I would have left 15 minutes earlier.
That's right.
Right. And I'm someone who's late to everything, but still.
But no, I totally get that. And we've been mentioning books here. What Andy does is well beyond books, but Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willinek's great book on that. Byron Katie has a ton of different books in terms of loving what is, and then taking ownership of your percentage of it, no matter how small it is. And then once you do that, not only does it make you feel a little better, it gives you a little empowerment. You can say, I did everything I could, I've laid it out, and if everything else still didn't go right, I still feel good about it because I put in the effort, and the rest of it just did what it did. But that alone is a good enough reason, not to mention the fact that it actually works.
I gave it a shot. At least you can say, going back to talking to your 80-year-old self, at least I gave it a shot. I put my all into it, my effort into it, and it may not work out, but that may be a lesson or an opportunity for you to pivot and do something else. Because I'm also big on the idea of growth mindset. One of the best and biggest shifts I've made in my life too, which comes from the book, Mindset, New Psychology of Success by Dr. Carol Dweck from Stanford. And she posited that people generally live with either a fixed or a growth mindset. And with a fixed mindset, we believe that everything in life is fixed. We're either like good at something or we're not. We're smart or we're not, right? And with a growth mindset, we believe that we can always get better. We can always learn. We can always improve. And I realized that I grew up with a very fixed mindset. And as a result, I was terrified of failure. And so I didn't try risky things. I didn't try new things. And when I read that book in 2016, that same year, it was like another lightning bolt, completely changed my life. And I committed to living with more of a growth mindset. And that has allowed me to try a lot of things, to get out of my comfort zone and just try a lot of stuff. And I failed at plenty of things, but I see them all as learning opportunities that have allowed me to learn and grow and achieve a lot more things as a result.
Going back to step 3, when somebody creates goals, they have a plan to reach those goals. And that's a given. Anybody in a corporate environment or anybody that owns their own small business gets that concept. What are some of the ways that you lay out in terms of setting the goal period and then taking some action toward them?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to go about it. I am, first and foremost, putting a plan together is already getting you ahead of the game, but I'm a big fan of the SMART goal framework: specific, measurable, actionable, relative, and time bound. I think it's really important that you check in with that and get as specific as possible with goals, because, and one way I always like refer back is accountability is big as well. I love that. And so if I was going to hold you accountable, or Charles, you hired Charles as your coach and he was going to hold you accountable, and he was going to call you every Friday and check in with him, would you be able to give him a progress report, right? Going back to that gym example, if I said, I want to be in better shape, like, what the hell does that mean? Like, how would you measure that, right? Versus if I said, okay, I want to lose 20 pounds or gain 10 pounds of muscle mass with this waistline by going to the gym 4 times a week and eating a specific diet, then you could call me on Friday and be like, hey, Andy, did you go to the gym 4 times this week? Right. And how, what did you do there? And what was your diet like this week? That's something that we can get like really specific and measurable on. You want to put a timeline, a deadline on it as well. I'm big on that. I know there's a lot of studies that show that if you just write down your goals, that's going to increase your chances of achieving them. I'm big on that. Tell other people, get a coach or have someone hold you accountable, right? I've had accountability groups for many things over the years, and it has helped me so much, including going back to starting that early morning routine. I had a group of guys. We just kind of text each other every morning. Like, hey, did you get up early? Did you drink your water? Did you do your meditation? Like, awesome. That's kind of it. Right. And then there's other things. I love taking the big goals and turning them into habits or like smaller things that you can do. Right. That makes a big difference. Going back to the book, when I had the idea for the book, I thought, okay, I want to write this book. I don't know how to write a book. I started asking people. Luckily, I had some authors in my network. Started asking people, how long is a typical business book? And people said, and invariably it came back around 50,000 words, right? And I was like,
That's right.
50,000 words? Like, how am I going to write that? I've never even written a blog before. But I had a great mentor. Her name's Honoré Cordeau, who's published over 50 books. And she said, you don't focus on the huge 50,000 goal word. You just focus on writing 500 words a day for 100
That's
days.
right.
And that'll get you to 50,000 words. And I was like, wow, that seems a lot more doable. She said, you probably write emails that are 500 words. And I went, man, I hope I don't do that, but it's possible. And so that's exactly what I did. I wrote every morning usually between 6 and 7 a.m. for a little less than an hour, about an hour maybe. And I did that for 3.5 months. I averaged 538 words a day, and I got to like 65,000 words. And then I ended up editing that back. But it all came down to just like, forget the big goal, just one day at a time, like putting in the progress. And same with like building my business as an entrepreneur. I got to do sales and outreach just like most other entrepreneurs. I just reach out to a few clients every day, reach out to a few people every day, right? And that turns into meetings, and some of those turn into deals, into business. And it just keeps paying off over time. But I know I just have to keep putting in the consistent work, just like with the personal development stuff as well.
Man, I love all of that. And that for a lot of us, when we're talking about setting these goals and just breaking them down, one of the cool things that you learn how to do is that after you start working toward that goal, you develop a new habit. And that might be something that sticks with you well beyond and after you achieve that goal. And you're talking about the people who write that write down their goal and then share it with somebody, create progress report. Dominican College in 1996, and yes, it's a real place, did just that. They had, I think, 700 something people, divided them up into 5 groups, and that's exactly what they did. The first group just thought about their goal, and then the next wrote it down, and then they shared, and then they created a progress report, and then they had steps. But they went from like, I don't know, 30-something% to achievement down to 76% by going through each one of these, and they all got bigger and better and faster. But look, this is flown by. I got a couple of fun questions, or I say fun for me. Probably you hate them, but easy one right here. We mentioned all the books. Let's go back. Was the first book you mentioned Miracle Morning?
I think it was The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. Yes. Hal
Elrod.
That's right.
And then you also mentioned Gap in the Gain, Dan Sullivan. You got any other? I mean, since you've been cramming in books for the last 8 years, you got another good one for me?
Well, I've read a lot of books, and really, like, my tip on that, by the way, and you might do this, but is with that morning routine. I've always loved books. I grew up reading a lot of books, mostly fiction, and I became adult, right? And like life happens and you just don't make time to read as much.
Right.
And so I would typically have a book on my nightstand, and I like to read at night. I would get into bed and I'd open the book. And if it's a nonfiction book, I would read like 1 or 2 pages and then I would fall asleep, right?
Yeah.
And so on average, I found myself reading about 1 or 2 books a year. And when I started doing this morning routine, getting up earlier and just dedicating 15 to 20 minutes a day to reading. And I find I have more energy and focus in the morning. It also helps to have a cup of coffee next to you, right? And since then, I've been reading between 25 and 30 books a year, just by making that shift to reading in the morning from reading at night. Now I read nonfiction in the morning, I read fiction at night. I've read a lot of good books. I mean, Miracle Morning was one that definitely made a big impact for me. Was Mindset by Dr. Carol Dweck. One book that I still read every day to this day is The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. That's probably the book that I recommend more than any other. It's a daily quote from the Stoics with sort of a modern explanation, if you will. And I find that book, more than anything else, has helped me transform my mindset and really learn how to live my best life without worrying about all the other things that are going on. It's really become my Bible, if you will. And then I know it's like with your questions ahead of time, it was like, what's one of your favorite books, or what are you reading now? I just started reading a new book called 4,000 Weeks. Have you read that one already?
Dude, I have that. Yeah, nobody can see my notes here, but I already had that in the notes as a recommendation. Look at us hanging out.
Boom, 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Berkman.
I
have read the first chapter and I'm just highlighting like crazy, and it's just resonating because there's a lot of things that I've thought about, because I've read a lot of time management, productivity. Like I know you're big on this stuff. Like I'm obsessed with how do I make myself as efficient as possible. I've got VAs and all these systems. But the whole book, it really starts with like our whole relationship with time. It's just kind of mind blowing when you really think about where we are. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
that might have. I apologize, folks. That was the most nerdy point on this podcast out of all of them, where I got super excited that Andy mentioned 4,000 weeks, and I had already written it down.
Look at
I
that.
had, dude. I listened to that one, and then I'm re-listening to it again, and I'm
Yeah.
probably it might be my daily stoic for anybody listening. The concept is we're going to be around about 4,000 weeks. If
Mhm.
you are a centenarian, like if you're going to be 100, great, you get 5,000 maybe. But the point is, it's a limited period of time, and we focus on so many of the wrong things, and we put way too much pressure on ourselves for the wrong things. And it's either way, great book.
Yeah.
Real quick, Andy, in the idea of do more by doing less,
Mhm.
and you, I think you've already done all these things, but humor me. What's something you should be doing less of right now?
I saw that and I was really, so here's an interesting twist on that. I think that the word should is such a judgment word that I've been trying to eliminate it from my lexicon, if you will.
Okay.
Now, I heard someone tell me that years ago, and I made a commitment that I wasn't ever going to tell anybody that they should do anything, right? And what I realized very recently was that I had stopped I don't tell other people what they should do. I can say, hey, if I were in your shoes, here's what I would think about, or you might want to think about this, but don't tell me what they should do. I try not to tell myself what I should do, but I realized that I've actually been telling myself should a lot in past tense. And my wife caught me recently and she's like, so basically let's say I go out and I don't know why this is an example. I forget my coat. I'd be like, I should have, it's cold. Like I should have brought my coat.
Mm-hmm.
I'm shooting all the time on myself. I should stop telling myself what I should have done, because when you think about it, it is a judgment term, because you're basically saying like, well, if you were smarter, you would have thought about this and brought your coat, instead of, hey, it's cold, I wish I would have brought my coat. Next time I'm going to try to think about it. That's one thing that I am trying to do a little bit less of.
Well, how should I ask the question? And now I feel like I've judged 28 other people.
Well, you could say what's one thing that you wish you did less of, and what's one thing you wish you did more of. I could say I wish that I read even more and that I picked up my phone less. I could say maybe.
All right, that's the perfect answer. That's what I was looking for, Andy.
Yeah.
Andy wishes he spent, and that for anybody listening, track your time, folks. Everybody keeps harping on their kids. I've got a 15, 12, 11-year-old, and we screen time limited, this, that, and the other. And then whenever the wife or I have to pick up settings and screen time, like, ugh, we're not, we should be a little less judgy. But yes, put the phone down, pick the books up more, quit shooting so much. Andy, how can somebody find you?
Man, Charles, I'm all over I try to be all over the place. I should be in more places. I have a couple podcasts. One's called the Own Your Career podcast. The other's the Talent Development Think Tank. If you want to get my free resources, which includes the 5 steps to owning your career, as well as the top 5 most common career mistakes, you can go to ownyourcareerownyourlife.com/bonus, and it will let you download those. You can also get info in the book, which is available on Amazon. And I'm also on LinkedIn and Instagram and all those places as well. Probably should be less.
There we go. Andy, brother, I appreciate this. Was very fun. Got a lot of good bits of information here. Take care of those plants, and we will chat soon.
Thanks, Charles. This was awesome.
Don't take off just yet. I've created a new program just for you, helping overworked entrepreneurs create their very own 4-day work week in 90 days or less. Look, if you'd rather spend more time with family, friends, traveling, exercising, having the time to do what you want instead of, I don't know, putting out never-ending fires, tackling another to-do list, and checking email at 9 p.m., then go to my website, yourcharlesalexander.com. If you've created the income you want but don't have the time freedom you deserve, then this is for you. And as always, if you don't, an angel may actually lose its wings. True story. Have a great day.